Hello, my name is Naya, the marketing lead for Soul Detective. This is our production documentary where we give a glimpse of our developments behind the game. The premise behind Soul Detective is to play as a detective nicknamed Ghost Detective, also known as GD. He is accompanied by a magnifying glass called Magnus, who grants GD ghost powers like telekinesis and possession. Their goal is to explore mysterious worlds and figure out who their attacker was. This is the game pitch that started the project. The high concept was hunting and tracking lost souls and malicious spirits in the afterlife on a mysterious, whimsical journey. The game is intended to be a third-person, narrative-driven action and puzzle game using ghost-like abilities such as telekinesis and possession. Now, let us introduce the game's developments. This is sprints 1 and 2. This was where the design process began for our game.
Knowing Noah's pitch, following his favorite games, I also made a connection with. Immediate jump for myself when picking this project. Once development started, most I look forward to was seeing our team's skills and disciplines show through early work that was made, and some actually carried to the end. For an example of John Carlo's model of our protagonist, that was made in our first sprint, and we never had to remake or tweak it since.
Sprint 1 and 2 answers. Question 1. I was rather interested in the direction of the game that we were going to take it because it was a similar vibe to the Grim Fandango, which was really kind of cool game. The direction of the game, I would say, is very different from the original concept, but I think it's still a pretty neat game that we made, and it's definitely fun to get through. So I'm not disappointed in the way it went, but it is definitely different.
Design and code. Our scope was small, while at the same time we had ideas that were too big. Some leadership roles had to be changed, and documentation was a struggle to start, as well as getting the team to actually review them. Something like the GitHub repository is very crucial to follow directions. Some didn't, unfortunately, at the start, and it needed a lot of motivation for some people to actually sit down and read the documents. Through the later half of the first semester, we started to get a hold and feel for the process and no longer had issues in leadership.
The possession mechanic definitely seemed promising. I was looking forward to seeing how it would be implemented in gameplay, like through puzzles or combat. And I also wanted to see how the art style of our vision holder would pull through and translate to 3D art. For sprints 1 and 2, I don't think we really had any setbacks since this was the design/concepting phase of our development.
I'm going to say that some aspects that I looked forward to seeing would be the kind of story elements we were planning to use as well as characters. For the second question, my answer for setbacks would be a setback I encountered during these early stages was that the repository completely broke and I had to find a solution. I recovered by creating a new repository and making sure it was working properly and testing commits. It would be that figuring out a structure and making sure it made sense was my main focus during the early stages.
This is sprints 3 and 4. This was when we started integrations and developed our vertical slice demo.
Demoting, sending warnings, and citations. Taking team members off tasks that they just couldn't do due to time constraints and lack of other team members in the same discipline. Worked a lot with the professor for these major swings, and he assisted a lot regarding. I have experience with my day job, but it's hard to require. Following question run, changing leadership roles, having to do emergency meetings at 1 a.m. with the design team due to them making set issues and seemingly unaware. Had to set warnings issued from Professor Negrin, probably the roughest lead up to posting the build we had. Documentation and enforcing. Yes, forcing or heavily incentivizing everyone to follow in order not to create similar critical errors in engine.
Sprint 3 and 4. Question 1. We really had to scope up in terms of like the level design because the levels were very small as it was going in those initial stages. So we had to change a lot there, and I feel like we definitely did there. Question 2. There was a disparity between the code capabilities and our art capabilities. This was really becoming apparent in this stage. So we had to tweak a lot of the direction of the final game to sort of be within the capabilities of our code team. Question 3. Definitely know the limitations of my team, like what we can and can't do better.
For art team, we were completing tasks and creating assets faster than we could come up with newer ones. To fix this, I had art team as a whole brainstorm art-specific tasks that we could do that would both benefit our game and not require too much effort to implement code-wise. I think I would have used these early sprints to get art team accustomed to going in-engine. That way they can see how to set up their assets. Having the team go through that process might have helped give them a better understanding of how they could make their own assets more efficient, specifically for the game engine.
For Sprint 3 and 4, my answer to the first question, some setbacks I noticed. Nothing was set up to make the integration process easy for the code department, and the only way I could recover at the time would be to take over what was not done and finish it. The answer for question number 2 would be figuring out what we could prioritize based on what was not done versus what we could get done with the amount of time we had left. My answer for question 3 would be trying to figure out a structure that would be good for everyone and making sure everyone is aware of what they need to have done. And for additional feedback, during integration and vertical slice stage, code department felt burnt out from having to finish designs work before working on implementing our code.
This is sprints 5 and 6. This was when we learned from our experience from the vertical slice and started improvising and expanding the game.
Sprint 5 and 6 felt streamlined, no huge issues other than people forgetting to track hours, even though it's a large portion of your grade.
Sprint 5 and 6. Question 1. I think the biggest setbacks were, in this phase at least, the code issues that were cropping up. And the way we kind of worked through that was just brute force. We did what we could. Code team put in really freaking long hours there. Question 2. Biggest decision I had to make there was sort of working with the other leadership in changing our leadership for design team. I didn't want to have to make changes to leadership, especially at this point in the game, but it was kind of needed, and we went through with it. Question 3. If I have downtime to plan, use every single second of that downtime so I can have every little last detail planned. No question 4.
Everyone knew generally what each level would look like concept-wise, but our team could only brainstorm around 5 to 8 environment models that we'd need per level. This wouldn't be sustainable in the long run, given how quickly the team worked during previous sprints. So I would often ask design team to add to our master list of any and all assets that might go into the levels for set dressing. That way art team would have a healthy backlog of models to make. I'd say the biggest decision was to convert to Unity's universal render pipeline instead of their built-in renderer. This way we could utilize shader graph and VFX graph. It definitely had the potential to break some things and required a lot of manual labor trying to update each asset to work with the new renderer, but a lot of the visuals currently in-game wouldn't have been possible without the change.
For Sprint 5 and 6, The answer for question 1 I had. Some setbacks I encountered were mostly teaching everyone again on how to commit, as well as trying to help design team to provide tips on getting certain things done. I recovered by having reminders and having meetings with people and letting them know they can message me with their questions. My answer for question 2, the most difficult decision at this stage was trying to figure out the best way to spread tasks out for code department, as well as taking over design department with figuring out everyone's strengths and weaknesses to see what I can do to help. My answer for question 3 would be some changes I would probably make would be to have more cross-department meetings early on. And for additional feedback, design was becoming more improved with more meetings, as well as code was fixing bugs and hoping to not crunch an engine.
This is Sprint 7. This was when the game became feature complete.
Design and code. Lots of edits and last minute changes had to be made, so we were set for the grade, as well as decisions on content to be cut. This is where I jumped in and became the mainline designer. I can't see anything other than having more code programmers on staff. The amount of work and responsibility for 3 programmers we had was unfair in my opinion, but I and Aaron, our creative director, helped where we could.
Sprint 7. Question 1. We really were lacking in our capacity and capabilities for code team. And really how we recovered from that was me getting in on board as a little assistant programmer. Question 2. This was the point where we had to cut out a lot of things for code team. We had thought with the scoping down that we could do a lot more, but we had to cut down from here. Question 3. Getting in earlier as a coder if I am thinking I'm going to be needed as a coder or an assistant at any position realistically, because I'd like to think I can do stuff, so I should do stuff. No question 4.
Occasionally, people outside of art team would import assets without letting anyone know and without putting them in the correct file locations. They would also not use them as intended, like scaling them improperly or not using prefab. This caused a lot of organization and on a future game project, I'd probably have some of art team branch out in terms of skills. While working on this project, I'd let the team do what they were most comfortable with for the most part, but someone still had to pick up the extra tasks. It ended up being the one person working on a large variety of tasks when it probably could have been divided better so each person gets just one task outside of their comfort zone.
For Sprint 7, the answer for the first question, some setbacks I would say was to take certain features out we were hoping to include, but we recovered because we realized accessibility features were not necessary at the time. My answer for question 2, the only difficult decision made was mostly what was going into the game and what was not going into the game. For question 3, my answer was maybe trying to have more built out as far as certain phases being a bit longer than others. And for additional feedback, design improved greatly since there were more communication amongst each other and working together. Code had some issues mostly with bugs, but wanted to make sure we can get the features in.
This is Sprint 8. This was our alpha release build.
There were small setbacks in code with certain tasks and responsibility changes, but from what I recall, similar to Sprint 5 and 6, this was us being head down and working hard to hit the date.
Sprint 8. Question 1. There was so much that we had to do, and there was so little time to do it, so we just did what we could. That was the biggest setback, is just time. So that's really, we just did what we could. Question 2. Biggest decision that I had to make was cutting things. This was another big area where we were starting to cut and cut and cut, because there was so little time in the future, so we didn't have time to make things for later. Question 3. Plan later sprints to make smaller additions to the game. Don't try to leave big additions to the game towards the end. Have like an end phase be sort of, tiny little addition that will not necessarily majorly impact the final product. No. Question 4.
There were a lot of tasks that our team was assigned to do this sprint, more than we'd probably have been able to realistically get done. This meant we had to reprioritize and cut some of the extraneous tasks that were more juice than necessity. A lot of the tasks for this sprint was texturing, so we'd prioritize texturing the most important assets and cut whatever wasn't able to be completed.
For Sprint 8, my answer for the first question, some setbacks we had were to implement more story into our game. But we kind of recovered by mostly trying to prioritize certain things more, since they were more important to put in. For question 2, my answer was, during this stage, I did not have any difficult decisions to make. For question 3, I would most likely change timing of phases or certain changes or stages of the game, mostly to give more time for certain features to be implemented. And for additional feedback, everyone is working hard.
Finally, this is Sprint 9. This was when our release to manufacturer build and the whole project was complete.
Sprint 9 was extremely short, but was a mad dash with poster prints and marketing updates, final builds, missing features, and seeing the ship sail with some holes. But the saying goes, every game is never finished. Not entirely, however, my position is to handle task organization, keeping people motivated, and talking one-on-one when folks are having difficult issues. And I always want to try and assist. I'm art backgrounded, but heavy into design as well. Something like the lighting, with Sebastian and myself going full swing in the last coming months. The rest is up to the creative director. We'll share again, having the vision holder in a higher position if possible, or sway them into being one of our positions, producer, creative director, if they're interested. And as a program, we need more focus on programming. It's the weak spot in the knight's armor, and it needs more patchwork. Thank you.
Conclusion. I think the biggest setback we had on the sort of, especially around here in Sprint 9, was burnout, because I think most of the team at this point was checked out. We were all tired, so we just had to do what we could. It wasn't going to be perfect, but we did what we could. Question 2. Figuring out what we could have the rest of the team to do. That was like the biggest thing I had to decide as a leader, was like, our team is barely doing anything. We gotta have stuff for them to do, so I had to make things for them without having issues crop up with what they do on to code team. Question 3. I think if I'm having to plan around a tiny work sprint in the future, don't try to plan it like a normal sprint. Plan it as its own little thing, because it's going to be much smaller, and manage expectations. Question 4. I think my favorite part of working on the game is I can see, just about 90% of what is there is something we made. The only things that we didn't make are those animations and the background music. Heck, we even did the voiceover in-house, so that's really cool to see that basically just about everything is made by us. Question 5. It definitely didn't turn out as I would have imagined originally. It is a lot smaller in scope than I would have necessarily liked and definitely envisioned, but it's honestly okay. We had limitations within our team that I wasn't aware of, nobody was aware of when we started playing the game, and shit happens. So, yeah, I'm not displeased with how it turned out, but it's definitely not the original vision. No question 6.
For me, it was learning to create and work on things I'd never really tried to do before. In some cases, I was learning directly from my peers. Then, being able to see what I created used in game is pretty fulfilling. Honestly, I can't say that I did, and that's not a bad thing. I think that's just part of the process of game development. It's iterative. It was inevitable that what I'd envisioned at the start of this project would be very different from the final product. That doesn't make it any less impressive, though.
And for Sprint 9, my answer for the first question, we ran into a bunch of bugs which set us back, but we recovered by getting whatever we could and finished up. For question 2, my answer was, the only difficult decision I mostly had to make was prioritizing certain tasks of what was left to do. For question 3, I would probably change mostly having the scope lowered towards the end instead of it becoming bigger. For question 4, my favorite aspect of working on this project was being able to help other people and building an awesome game. For question 5, the project did not turn out the way I'd imagined it, mostly because I wish we would have added more juice to the game and polished a bit more. And for additional feedback, we finally did it, guys.
Overall, thank you for watching. It was nice sharing how we developed Soul Detective. We hope everyone who gets to play it enjoys it.